is changing permissions. Now see, this is a
Sir,
free version of, yeah, this is a
sir,
free version of Miro.
I don't think it's editable, sir. Your board, sir. Like last time I checked, it was not.
Okay, are you sure?
So yes, sir. Yes, sir, I think so, sir. You just check the permissions. Like, are there like there should be a settings option or
See,
something like
see,
that.
see, see. I'm just showing you my screen, right? So you can see it's Shubhrajit sir 12th Feb. So this is the name of a board that I didn't give. Somebody else named the board, and it has become view only for me. Can you see that?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
There is another board called Untitled just on the right of Shubhrajit sir 12th Feb board, and
Yes,
that is
sir.
also view only for me. Okay, and
Yeah.
somebody created Shubhrajit sir third board, second board, Untitled, and I find that this Untitled board on the left, this one, uh, this one is the board that has the contents of the previous classes on grammars. That's okay. Now I have to check whether I can edit that or not.
Okay, sir.
Yeah. Now this is where we ended, right? So do you have the boards? You have the copy of the boards with you, right?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. We have the copy of the board, sir.
Okay, okay, that's good. Just give me a minute. This thickness of this pencil is not as that I desire. I don't know. It's very thin. So shall I start?
Um, yes, sir. Yes, sir. No problem, sir.
How many people are
And
there?
sir, one question, sir. Sir, for our
Yeah.
TOC exam, sir, what is the syllabus still?
For the TOC exam, I had a preliminary meeting with madam, and we are going to finalize it by Thursday. Okay. So the
Okay, sir.
syllabus will be, see, the intention of having mid semesters and class assessments is that it is of type continuous, right? So as long as we study, as far as we study, everything will be there in the exam.
Okay, sir.
So if the exam is held on Saturday, everything that we study up to Thursday will be there.
Okay, sir.
We are going to have again a class on Friday, right? Because every Friday we are going to have a class. So from this week we are going to have 3 classes per week.
Yes, sir.
Okay. But people have not joined. So what to do?
So there is almost 100 people, sir. That's the
Very
attendance in almost all the classes, sir.
okay. Okay. Shall I start? Okay.
Yes, sir.
So
Yes, sir.
let us come back to this Venn diagram. I was drawing some Venn diagram, but I am worried that my pen is not thick enough. Can you see this properly? Or give me some time to restart this app. Okay. I'm joining in 2 minutes.
Okay, sir. Okay, sir.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I hope I am audible, right? There is no issue.
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Yes, sir.
sir.
You're
Yeah.
audible.
Okay. Okay. Let me share the screen right now. Let's check whether the thickness of the pen is good enough. Okay. So we ended last day's class with this Venn diagram, right? So this was a Venn diagram that I ended the class with. Everybody can see my board, right? Okay. So
Yes.
yeah. So at the core we had the regular grammars, regular languages. At the core, this is a language hierarchy Venn diagram. At the core, we had regular languages, and for that we had finite state machines, right? The machine equivalent of this portion was finite state machines, and I talked about two more language types that are used in practical cases where you have where you want to have parsers designed for, say, your programming languages, and that are essentially deterministic in nature. Okay, so so I talked about LLK and LRK grammars or languages, and that particular sort of language, these particular sort of languages actually fits your programming languages, right? LLK and LRK. That that L stands for example, LL stands for, if I talk about a LL grammar, it stands for an essentially a context-free grammar, that is deterministic in nature, and L stands for left to right, and the second L stands for a leftmost derivation, right? So with with the help of the LL bracket K stands for lookat symbol. So I'm not going to detail into LLK and LRK grammars. I'm just interested to show you the hierarchy, and from this hierarchy we are going to derive certain properties of languages. Especially I will focus on context-free languages in this class, and later on both of us will um, try to elaborate further on other language classes. That's the main intention. So my main intention in today's class is not to elaborate on LLK and LRK. These are the things that you are going to learn in later course of time. So just for curiosity, you can find that this this L stands for this left to right. So whatever you do, you need to do a left to right scan of string S, and this L stands for leftmost derivation. Leftmost derivation of what? Leftmost derivation of grammar rules that you are supplied. So when you are talking about a LLK grammar, it means that essentially we are trying to parse some string from left to right using some leftmost derivation, always using leftmost derivations of grammar rules, and we are trying to create a top-down parse to generate strings. And so it is called, this is a very important grammar for generating top-down parse trees for checking whether a particular string is an element of a particular LL grammar or not. So this LL grammar is nothing but essentially a deterministic context-free language, right? And it is contained within a class called LRK, right? This L stands as usual for left to right. This LR, L stands for left to right. So if I elaborate LR here, so this L stands for again a left to right scan, left to right scan. But this R stands for rightmost derivation, right? Rightmost derivation. And this is another class of languages, or if you say that the grammar equivalent of that language, this is another class of grammars that is also essentially a deterministic context free language, right? or a deterministic context-free grammar. That determines that gives you a approach of deriving strings and checking whether a particular string is an element of that particular class of grammars or that particular class of language, either it be LL or LR. It checks whether this is an element of this in a deterministic way. So it's both of them are context-free languages, nothing else, nothing other than that. That is what I mean, right? And both of them are deterministic. So up to this, whatever you have in this Venn diagram is of the nature deterministic. That is what is I am more interested in. So I am less interested in defining LLK and LRK. You are going to study in compilers, right? So I give you an introduction to what are all these things. But this portion of the Venn diagram talks about deterministic class, essentially the deterministic class. Got it? And since you are talking about deterministic class, determinism is often tightly associated with something called unambiguous. So I contain this whole portion under the shadow of unambiguous languages. So I define something like unambiguous languages in this bigger circle, right? So that essentially everything under it becomes unambiguous, and since it becomes unambiguous, obviously it is very tightly coupled or related to something called determinism. So the more you go for deterministic approaches, the more you can get rid of ambiguity. That is what I mean. And above that, you have the general context-free class, right? Please turn off your microphones. And above that, you have the general context-free languages, right? So the whole thing is contained with general context-free languages, and the machine equivalent of general context-free languages is non-deterministic push-down automata. So obviously, when I talk about unambiguous languages and the portion that is contained within these unambiguous languages, the portion that I mark with this light blue, that means it is possible to define something called a deterministic push-down automaton for this. So for this portion, it is possible to design something called a deterministic push-down automaton. But when you talk about context-free languages in general, in the most general case, this circle that encompasses everything within it, we will call the general context-free languages, and the machine equivalent of that is a non-deterministic push-down automata. What my point? So in finite automata case, you found that a DFA is always equivalent to a NFA, right? You found that. Got my point? Yes or no? You found that a DFA is always equivalent to NFA as long as you talk about the class of languages it accepts. So they are essentially the same with respect to the fact that they are capable of accepting the same class of languages. But in case of context-free languages, a non-deterministic push-down automaton is not equal to a deterministic push-down automaton. We'll deal with all these things in later classes as far as the class of languages it accepts is concerned. So to excite you more, the programming languages that we often deal with, the programming languages for which we try to design grammars, we try to design parse trees, we try to answer the question whether this particular string is parsable with the grammar, with the programming language. That's the essential question. That's the most general form of the question that every time you ask when you are designing a programming language. So that is contained within this portion, right? And context-free languages in most general form is the whole thing. So as my board work is extremely horrible, let me redraw the picture once more so that it becomes very clear to you, so that I can proceed further. So at the core, I represent the regular languages, right? And then I talk about something called unambiguous languages. Unambiguous languages. Then I talk about context-free languages in the most general form, context-free languages in the most general form. Then I talk about certain subclasses of this unambiguous language class that are of very practical use, that are mostly used in design of programming languages, the deterministic ones, the unambiguous ones, and let me define a hierarchy for them. I write LLK here and contain that LLK within LLR, right? Just remember these concepts. You are going to elaborate on this concept later on when you are going to study compilers, right? Because compilers are always designed for programming languages perspective. So, so the machine equivalent parts, I'm very sorry, my pen width is not as desirable. For the machine equivalent parts,
Sir,
I
I
write in red.
think, sir,
Yeah,
I think if you increase that 1% to like a higher percentage, it would help. Like the
very
1% at
sorry.
the, yeah, yes, sir. I guess in that case, it'll give thicker lines. Yes, sir. Like this.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, but the overall picture has become.
Sir, in that case, like since the screen is kind of infinite, sir, increasing
Yeah.
the percentage won't affect the
Okay,
screen
but
size.
that depends on the form factor of the device in which you are attending my class. If it's a phone, it will be intolerable, right? So if it's a big computer monitor, it will be better, right? Got my point? The
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
form factor of the viewing machine is also important.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so what is most important is now what I do is I will use the red ink to write the machines that we talk about in recognition of these languages. So for regular languages, we know it is finite state machines. Done. And also the grammar equivalent, we know we have regular expressions. There's a kind of mechanical way of generating strings, right? Okay, for LLK, we call it a predictive parser, predictive or top-down parser, right? For LRK, what we call for LRK is called a bottom-up parser, and it essentially matches with the class of what we call deterministic push-down automata, right? Or bottom-up parsing, right? Now you have unambiguous languages. This circle, remember, this circle is intentionally drawn so that just to show that this portion is unambiguous and deterministic in nature, right? Got my point? So what I want to relate is this unambiguity has to do with more of determinism than of non-determinism. But in this case of regular languages, we know that there are theorems that say that the deterministic part and the non-deterministic part are equivalent. In that sense, you can say, okay, since they are equivalent, this whole circle may be thought of as uh, deterministically decidable. There is a term called decidable. I will talk about that later on. Now let me come back. Let me come to the bigger circle, CFL. So see, CFL is a circle that encompasses unambiguous languages. That means this portion may have ambiguity. Do we agree? This portion may have ambiguity. So the non-deterministic push-down automaton, the machine equivalent that is used for uh, generating or accepting context-free languages in general, this portion is able to deal with ambiguity, right? That is what I mean. So right. So now this whole thing, if I contain this whole thing, I can say that okay, this whole thing is very computable. Just listen to me. No need to worry about. I'll use many terms and slowly introduce you to terms, right? So this whole thing is very computable. So this regular languages, you know that it is computable, and you will see that okay, if you design predictive top-down parsing mechanisms to parse strings of a programming language, that is also a very computable problem. So context-free languages will see that they are computable problems. So we contain this whole Venn diagram inside something called inside another circle, and say that okay, these are decidable languages, right? We'll talk about decidability later on, but without giving a very short notion, I cannot progress. That's why I'm talking about such things. So these are all decidable classes of languages, right? So so whenever you say decidable, you can also say certain terms. So you can also use the term recursive. You can also use the term computable. You can also use the term solvable. So essentially, this whole thing is the whole thing contained here is very computable. It is very computable. Uh, it is recursive in nature. I'm happy to say that this is recursive in nature because I talked about so much of recursion, right? So this is recursive in nature, and this is solvable in nature. Now, once you say that this is recursive, that means if you try to remember the regular expression classes, recursion was a method of construction. Recursion was a method of construction that says that okay, until and unless the innermost portion is computed and the result is given to the outer shell, you cannot proceed with the computation, right? So all of these terms, recursive, computable, solvable, obviously relate to some model of computation that is most acceptable. So it should relate to some model of computation that would prove that okay, it is indeed recursive, it is indeed computable, and it is indeed solvable. And this model of computation that gives you that is most established, and that gives you the best notion of defining problems and solving problems and answering these questions, whether it is recursive, whether it is computable, whether it is solvable, or whether it is decidable. These are all the same terms, the same thing. It means the same thing, right? We will talk about Turing machines later on. So I'm in today's class, I'm giving you a broader view because I'm confident that you know context-free languages and you know the relationship of context-free languages with regular languages right now from the last class, right? So we'll say that this portion, decidable portion, is has the machine equivalent of this is a Turing machine, and we will ask the Turing machine certain questions, and if it holds with an answer, we'll say that okay, it is decidable. So it's a Turing machine that holds. So this portion is a Turing machine that holds, and this portion always includes everything within it. That is the meaning of a Venn diagram, right? So anything that is above this is not decidable. But Turing machine is such a model of computation. It says that even if it is not decidable, it is still recognizable. So I introduce another term, recognizable, right? Turing recognizable. This Turing recognizability has also some common terms that are equivalent to the term recognizable. Those are called recursively enumerable, partially decidable, partially recursive functions, semi-decidable, anything. Got it? Yes or no? Yes or no? So, so I begin today's class with the notion that until I change the course of discussion, context-free languages. By context-free languages, I mean this circle, the most general circle, and by machine equivalent of context-free languages, unless otherwise restated by me, up till that time, I mean a non-deterministic push-down automata. Got my point? Yes or no? Yes or no? Everybody's there? Yes. So from last class, you had seen that regular languages are contained within context-free languages, right? This was the most important thing that we derived from the last class. Do you agree? And we have seen that, okay, with some examples that I took in previous classes, I took the very simple example that you know that for regular languages, any number of zeros, any number of ones is regular, right? And m greater than equal to 0. This 0 is just to include epsilon. And same number of zeros and same number of ones was context free, right? Yes or no?
sir.
And yeah, and we define in the most general case how grammars equivalent of these languages should look like. So in case of context-free regular grammars, we said that since all productions are of the form alpha goes to beta, where alpha, beta are elements of V union T star. Remember, since you have a star, uh, beta is epsilon is always a valid production, right? So in case of regular grammars, I defined the right linear form of regular grammars like this, that alpha mod alpha is equal to 1 and a non-terminal. Obviously, if it's a 1, it's a non-terminal. A terminal cannot derive anything. That's very obvious. And a beta should look like, it should be series of terminals, or it should be a series of terminals followed by a non-terminal. If you have a non-terminal on the right hand side, in beta, if you have a non-terminal, it should be the rightmost symbol. In the last class, you also saw a equivalent of this in terms of left linear grammars, right? And I can show you examples of that equivalence later. That has already been covered. In case of context-free grammars, what did we say? We said that the left-hand side is essentially 1, and it means that it's obviously a non-terminal, and the right-hand side is essentially anything, any form. There is no restriction on how beta looks like. How beta looks like. Now, when I say that there is no restriction on how beta looks like, remember that beta, alpha and beta are members of V union T star. That means beta is epsilon is okay. Beta can be epsilon. That means if you say that there is essentially no restriction on how beta looks like, beta can have, beta is a single terminal is also okay. Beta is 2 terminals, 3 terminals, any number of terminals, of course finite is okay. I mean that beta is a non-terminal, A say is okay. I mean that beta is some non-terminals, within within those non-terminals you have terminals, it is also okay. Beta can be anything. By beta can be anything, and by my statement that beta is free to exist, what I mean, or if I say that beta, there is no restriction on how beta looks like in its most general form, I mean that all these are legitimate. Got my point? But in case of regular grammars, somebody said that, okay, I define how beta should look like. Beta can only be a series of terminals, or it can be a series of terminals followed by a non-terminal. If at all you have a non-terminal, the non-terminal is the rightmost symbol. And you have seen the equivalent of this, as it can be also the case, the left linear case, right? Okay, so with this notion, I want to come back to that problem. So we discussed all these things in previous classes. This was a very short recollection. Regular languages, context-free languages, and I also talked about a certain problem. I took an example. I just took an example, and I tried to introduce you to something called context-sensitive languages, right? And the example that I took was something that is not context-free. So it was 0n, 1n, 2n. Do you remember that? Yes or no? So I tried to define something called context sensitive language. And in that
Yes,
context
sir.
sensitive, yeah, in that context sensitive language, so that the language becomes context sensitive. So what is the meaning of context free? The meaning of context free is inherent in this most general form. Alpha is 1. It means alpha is 1 means it's a non-terminal. So any non-terminal, say you have a production of this form, A goes to A, B, C. So anywhere inside the sentential form, if you have, for example, you have a sentential form like this. You have something like X, it's a string, then you have A, then you have a string Y, right? At any point of derivation, you have this. So you are free to replace this A with A, B, C. That is something to do with context freeness. A is free of any context. You can apply A goes to A, B, C at any point of time, keeping the left and the right intact. That is what I mean. So this production type that the left hand side is 1, this is A is unique, right? And it goes to any right hand side. It may be a single terminal, it may be epsilon, it may be two terminals, it may be two terminals followed by a non-terminal, anything. That is what I mean by beta is anything and alpha is 1. I hope things are clear, right? So we come back to, we saw this example, 0n, 1 and 2n. Same number of zeros, ones and twos, and from previous classes, you learned that this is not context free. This is not context free, right? You proved with pumping lemma that, did you prove with pumping lemma? No, you have not studied pumping lemma. You will see with pumping lemma, it can be proved that this is not context free. But physically, we have seen that this is not context free, because context free languages, the machine equivalent of context free grammars, languages are finite state automation with a stack. And with a single stack, this is not solvable. We have seen, we have discussed, right? And we tried to derive a grammar for this. And the concept was that we start with the S, we generate 0, and we keep the recursion of generating this production. And internally, we frame that, okay, this is A's are non-terminals that will be responsible in due course of time to generate the ones, and B's are non-terminals that will be responsible for generating the twos. So if I apply this n number of times, you generate n number of zeros, and AB n times. So if we apply this n number of times, you have 0n S AB, right? That is what you have. AB, n number of times. If we apply this n times, you have this, right? Then, so this was rule number 1. Then we did some manipulation, and in yesterday's class, in the last class, I was not interested in that particular manipulation, but I will be interested today. Listen to me very properly. So for that manipulation, I introduced something called BA goes to AB. And I formed pairs like this BA, this BA, this BA, and we converted them to AB, right? So after applying this, we have S, A, B, AB, 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 something like this. But again, you had something like BA, right? You had something like this. So slowly you go on reducing and applying this for the required number of times, and you achieve something like 0n S A n B n. So it's in the format of the language that you are dealing with, zeros, ones, and twos. So in last class, I was not particularly interested in this, but today I will become interested. With that note, I start with the rest of the productions. What were the rest of the productions? The rest of the productions say that if A has a 0 on its left, only then A can be derived to a 1. Or if A has a 1 on its left, then A can be derived to a 1. So this A gets reduced to this 1 only when A has a 0 on its left, and only when A has a 1 on its left. So these are the left contexts of A. So A is not context free, as was the case in the last example. Here A was alone and A was context free. I was free to derive A, I was free to reduce A or to generate the right hand side of A by replacing A with this string at any point of time. But here I cannot do that. I can only find a 1 with respect to A if I have a 0 on the left of A, or if I have a 1 on the left of A. And this is facilitated with the fact that in this case, in the case of context free languages, I told you that mod alpha is less than equal to mod beta, but no requirement that mod alpha is 1. So I told you something like that mod alpha is less than equal to mod beta should be true, but mod alpha is not essentially equal to 1. In fact, it should not be 1, because if it is 1, things becomes context free. If there was no 0, A was context free. But since there is a 0 and there is a 1 on the left, and only when you have a 0A, you can replace this 0A with a 0, 1, it means that mod alpha is not equal to 1, right? So that defines the most general requirement for a grammar to be context sensitive. Got my point? Similarly for B, this B gets reduced to a 2 only when its left context is a 1 or its left context is a 2. Only then you can apply these productions and reduce a B to a 2 only when B is preceded by a 1 or B is preceded by a 2. Right? And we applied these grammar rules, and of course S goes to epsilon. We applied these grammars, we applied these grammar rules, and we saw that it is possible to have this grammar defined in this way to derive this language. Now, since it is a context sensitive language, the basic requirement was fulfilled by the fact that mod alpha is not 1. Sorry.
Or the red ink is not very visible, sir.
Yeah,
Could you
now
just
is it
zoom in?
visible? Yeah, now is it
Yes,
visible?
yes, sir.
Yes.
Now it's
So
visible.
it is
So,
going to 100. Okay. I wish I had a bigger form factor. I had a bigger monitor on which I could have written. Right? Okay. Now is it visible? Yes or
yes,
no?
sir.
So
Yes, sir. Yes,
so
yes, sir.
yeah. So the left hand side being not equal to 1 gives you the basic criteria that is required for a grammar to be context sensitive. Do you agree or not? Yes or no?
Yes, sir.
Yes
Yes,
or
sir.
no? Yes.
Yes, sir.
But to be more specific, how alpha looks like, now I introduce, I see, I introduce something that is more important for your understandability. So by context sensitiveness, I mean that if you have strings x and y, in the most general case, I have both the left and the right of a non-terminal A, then this, by context sensitiveness, I mean that if A has a left context of x and a right context of y, x and y are strings, you derive this A to a string called gamma by keeping this context intact. Right? I give this a general form, as I said, that 0A goes to 0, 1. This is what I meant. In this case, there was no right context. There was no right context, right? Only left context. But in this, since I'm generalizing this algebraically, since I'm generalizing this as a requirement for a grammar to be context sensitive, I say that, okay, here in this example, A is a non-terminal and it has a left context of x and a left context of y. So only when it has a left context of x and a right context of y, only then this A gets reduced to gamma. So A goes to gamma is no longer a transition, no longer a rule. Rather, XAY goes to X gamma Y is a valid rule. Got my point? Because if A goes to gamma was the rule, this was a context-free rule. A was free to be applied. But in this case, A is not free to be applied. A can be reduced to gamma. See, A can be reduced to gamma. This A can be reduced to this gamma only when there is a left context of A is X and the right context of A is Y. Only in that case, this A is going to reduce to get gamma, right? Similarly, in this example, we had 0A going to 0, 1. What did you see? We see that this A is essentially getting reduced to 1, but with a context, only when it has a 0 on the left. Got my point? So context sensitiveness, context sensitive grammars, I took this example. I took this classic example for the reasons that I defined in last classes. The reasons were this was a very simple form of grammar that you have been studying, right? So any number of zeros, any number of ones, you know this is regular, and uh, same number of zeros and ones, you know that this is not regular by pumping lemma of regular languages. You have proved that this is not regular. So what is that? Now, by the definition of alpha beta, how alpha beta looks like, we define that this is a context-free language, right? Similarly, we have seen, since we have not studied the pumping lemma for context-free languages, we took a different route, and I explained how a single stack and a single input string is inefficient to accept this language, right? And thus if we said that if a single input string and a stack is the machine equivalent of context-free languages, that particular machine is incapable of dealing with this language. So this language is not context-free. By looking at the of contexts and defining contexts, and believing the fact that mod alpha is not one, it gives you the chance to define another language class, and that is called context sensitive languages. Got my point? Yes or no? This much
Yes, sir.
introduction was, this much introduction was necessary. Otherwise, things will be incomplete as we go on. Got my point? So let us come back to context-free grammars. Again, let us come back to context-free grammars, and I let you know my plan. My plan is to talk about some examples of context-free grammars, to ask some questions on context-free grammars, some very basic questions of related to properties of context-free grammars, and to introduce you to some very important concept of a normal form. I'm sorry, normal form. You have seen normal forms in finite languages, right? You have seen normal forms. So, did you see normal forms in finite automata case?
No,
Okay,
sir, not
okay. Let me logically map to that. Did you think of minimum automata, minimum finite automata? Yes. Did you talk about
Yes,
that?
sir.
Yes,
So
sir.
Yes, sir.
what was the
Yes, sir.
main
Yes.
what was the main purpose of that? The main purpose of that was to whenever I give you a regular language, I ask you to build a finite automata. You can come up with many models, right? But if you come up with the minimum state finite automata model is that would be unique. So that uniqueness in model design gives you certain advantages, right? That you have studied. Similarly, here since we are talking about rules, since we are talking about production, since we are talking about reduction, since we are talking about deductions, since we are talking about, say, centillion forms, since we are talking about parse trees, it would be wise if we convert any context-free grammar G to its subsequent normal form. And the normal form that I am interested in today's and next day's class is known as Chomsky normal form. That it is named after the linguist and the language scientist called Noam Chomsky. Did you ever heard his name?
Yes, sir.
Noam Chomsky. Yeah,
Yes, sir.
yeah. So who is he? By the way, who is Noam Chomsky?
Sir, a linguist.
Yeah, a linguist and
Um, Sir, also a cognitive scientist, historian.
historian, cognitive scientist, a political reviewer, and most importantly, he is a professor of MIT, right? Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and most importantly, he is of good health and he is living till now, right? So what I mean is the Venn diagram onion that I just drew has a name, and its name is Chomsky hierarchy. This is a hierarchy perceived by Noam Chomsky. Of course, his hierarchy was more simpler, and his hierarchy was talking about only four inclusions, right? It was type 3, that is regular. It was type 2, that is context free. It was type 1, that is context sensitive, and it was type 0, that was Turing recognizable, right? I elaborated further because we need this further elaboration as a student of computer science for your future endeavors. But essentially, a Chomsky hierarchy is this much, right? And it includes everything that I talked about. This is more detailed one, and this is more of a conceptual one with less number of languages and less complexities to understand. So T3 was regular, T2 was context free, T1 was context sensitive, and T0 is also called phrase structured or Turing recognizable. So this much was decidable, and this much was above this is undecidable, semi-decidable, whatever you say, partially decidable, recursively enumerable, and so this portion is recursive. So regular, context free, context sensitive are recursive in nature and computable and solvable. So by solvable, what we mean by solvable? By solvable, we mean that if I say that there is a string W, and if I ask you whether W belongs to a context free language, yes, that is decidable. That is computable. You can compute that in finite number of steps, and you can say that okay, it is always possible to check whether some string is an element of a context free language. Similarly, some string, whether it's an element of a context sensitive language, is also decidable, right? Because this portion is decidable. Whether some string is an element of a finite automata is decidable. These are decidable portions. But there are certain questions that involve two or more languages of the same class that may not be decidable. So by decidability, when I solidify this Venn diagram portion by decidability, I mean this essentially simple question. So if I say that context-free languages are the languages that are mostly the languages that we deal with uh, while designing programming languages, while designing parsers for them, while designing compilers for them. In the most practical case, whether W is an element of such a language is a solvable problem, a computable problem, a recursively computable problem, and a decidable problem. Got my point? But when I ask whether uh, two context-free languages, for example, generate the same string or not, that question is not necessarily decidable. Now, let me come back to this Venn diagram for a very interesting thing that came to my mind. Now, who will say that okay, this is decidable or not? For that, you need a model of computation that is most acceptable, and that model of computation would be talked on later on. We have many classes on that, and that is called Turing. So let
Sir,
us come
one
back to
doubt, sir. Sir, one doubt, sir.
one minute. So I intend to talk about these normal forms, and I would show you how normal forms of grammars will be used later on to prove certain disability issues of context-free languages. Yes, question please.
Sir, how, like, could you just redefine decidability once, sir? I guess the net went off.
Okay, disability is see decidable is a new, recursive is not a new term, recursively computable is not a new term to you, solvability is not a new term to you, right? So just
No,
for
sir.
now, you just think of decidable. Decidable, what I mean is it is recursively computable and solvable. By computable and solvable, we mean that when as soon as I utter that term computable and solvable, that means that I am based on a model of computation, right? That model of computation that is widely accepted, that mimics the computability concept that you when you think of computers and solving a problem with computer, the notion of algorithm based on that model, the notion of finite number of steps based on that model, the notion of converging the algorithm converging in finite time based on that model comes in your mind, right? And that model is the most well accepted model of computation called the Turing machine. That will come later on. What I mean is, the language class that we are dealing with right now, that is the context-free languages. Context-free languages, most general form of context-free languages, and the most general question that you will ask while designing programming languages, while designing parsers for them, while designing compilers for them, is given a string W, is it an element of a given context-free language? So if there is a model M that solves this problem always, is there a model M that solves this problem always? So in the most general form, this question can be changed. So I will change the question like this: is it always possible for you to find whether W is a member of a context-free language? I change the question, right, in the most general form. If it is yes, then you can deterministically proceed with the LL1 or LLK or the LRK versions of this grammar, of this context-free grammar, and design a parser for that. Got my point? Only when you are sure that, okay, there is a decidable way, there is a computable way, there is a finite way to find out whether any given string is a member of any given context-free language. Got my point? So I can change the question. I can change the question that you are asking, that I am asking. So this is the question that I'm asking. I will change the question in perspective of programming languages. So is it possible? So I write the question: is it possible? Is it possible to design, to define, to draw a parse tree for deriving W using the production rules of a given CFL? Now this problem is computable. Who says? The Turing machine model says that this is computable. And also parallelly, you can show by some method called you convert this context-free language to a normal form, a stable form, where all the productions are of a particular look. All the productions look in a uniform way, right? And that is called. We'll start with the Chomsky normal form. And from here we define what is Chomsky. We'll define what is Chomsky normal form and use that Chomsky normal form to prove certain decidability problems like this. That can be also done, right? So, but if you want to say that, okay, sir, give me the algorithm that says that, okay, that always says whether a string is an element of a context-free language or not. If you ask me to give me that algorithm, then that algorithm should be based on certain model, and I would prefer to go for a Turing model for that, and give an algorithm in terms of Turing code. Got my point? Yes or no? Yes or no?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah. So that is what I mean. So what is Chomsky normal form? It's a by the name of by the name itself, it is very obvious that by normal form we mean that all the productions of a given context-free grammar, all the productions should be of a particular form. That is why it is called a normal form. You can have many grammars in many different forms. Why different forms? Because your beta was anything, right? If you remember that alpha goes to beta were the productions of any grammars defined in the VTPS format, and for context-free grammars, we said that left-hand side is essentially 1, and obviously if it is 1, it's a non-terminal, and beta has no restrictions. So beta can look like anything. These no restrictions actually can give you many grammars of different looks. Got my point? So by normal form, what I say is a Chomsky normal form of a particular all productions should be of a particular form. The left hand side is always equal to 1, but the right hand side can be two non-terminals side by side, or can be a terminal. This is the Chomsky normal form. Shall I repeat once more? When we define context-free grammars, when we define context-free grammars in the most general form, we said that any grammar that is defined by the VTPS tuple, 4 tuple. If we talk about restrictions, if we talk about freedom in grammars, we have to talk about those terms in terms of alphas and betas, because all productions are of the form alpha goes to beta. And we said in previous classes that in case of context-free grammars, it is context-free because the left-hand side is a single non-terminal. So a single non-terminal means whenever you see a non-terminal in some sentential form, you can immediately replace that non-terminal with the right-hand side, that is beta. So in case of a context-free language, mod alpha was 1. So all productions were of the form A goes to beta. Is it clear now? The left-hand side was a 1. But this right-hand side beta, I said that there is no restriction on how beta looks. Beta is a string from V union T star. So beta can be epsilon, beta can be a single terminal, beta can be two terminals, beta can be a single terminal followed by a non-terminal, followed by a terminal, followed by three non-terminals, anything. So that gives you a wide variety of betas. So there can be many context-free grammars with different looking production rules. I want to unify those rules and say that okay, let us put that grammar in a normal form. Let me put that grammar in a normal form. I will convert each and every rule of free betas into such betas. So here I define beta should always be two non-terminals, or beta can be a single terminal. Say two non-terminals or a single terminal. So a Chomsky normal form of a given grammar. So what do I mean? Say you have a context-free grammar that has productions of the form A goes to A, B, C, B goes to epsilon, and it goes to say D, E, F. Then you have C, C goes to epsilon, right? See, all the productions here are different. It looks different forms of beta. So all of these are in the form of alpha arrow beta. Very simple. So you have different looking betas, and it is allowable as long as the left hand side is a 1. It is context free, no problem. But I want to convert this in a normal form, Chomsky normal form, right? And that normal form says I will convert all these productions, all these varying productions, to a particular form, that the left hand side is 1 and the right hand side can be two non-terminals at most, or the right hand side can be a single terminal. So what is obvious is this Chomsky normal form. If you say that always it is possible to convert a given arbitrary context-free grammar to its Chomsky normal form, you actually mean that the right hand sides of productions of a context-free grammar, no matter how it looks, all can be converted back either this or this. It can be converted back. So what's the algorithm for that? Got my point? So every context-free language can be generated by a grammar in a Chomsky normal form. Is it clear? For every CFG, every arbitrary context-free grammar, it is possible for you to find the equivalent Chomsky normal form. So that essentially means that the free beta, however beta takes a look, it is always convertible to two non-terminals or a single terminal by a series of reductions. Got my point? So in a context-free grammar in a Chomsky normal form always has productions of the form A goes to two non-terminals or A goes to a single terminal. So if your grammar has 100 rules and each of those 100 rules are either of this form that A goes to two non-terminals or of this form that A goes to a terminal, then your grammar looks uniform. Do you agree with that? Your grammar is said to be normalized. Do you agree? Yes or no?
Yes, sir.
Yes or no? Yes. So that is normalization, right? So that is what I mean by normalization. So what are the steps? So you can think of the steps that um, uh, you can write down the steps. You can go to the book. Since I'm using a board, it will be. Do you have the book with you? The copy of the book. So please go through books. Let me start with Chomsky normal form in the next class. And what I want is that you go through the book and you just go through the steps, so that when I apply those steps in the board, it becomes obvious to you. Got my point? But very important points is there are two very important points. If I write them as step one, the first step should always be that start symbol S should not be on the right hand side. This is a rule that you should be applying. So I am talking about the algorithm. The first step of the algorithm should be, if your context free grammar has the start symbol on the right, you have to get rid of that. For example, 0n 1n case. What was the grammar that we designed? It was s goes to 0s1 or epsilon, right? Now this grammar, this CFG is a CFG, of course, because the left hand side is 1, no problem. As long as a single non-terminal is there on the left, it's context free, right? It's capable of giving a context free grammar, right? So, but the right hand side is not of right hand side is having a s, and also is not of the form that Chomsky normal form says. It says that all productions should be of this form. So you have to convert this grammar, an arbitrary CFG, to some form such that all productions are of the form A goes to BC or R terminal. You have to convert these two rules into, say, 5 rules, but all the 5 rules are of this form. Got my point? So the first point that you have to note is S cannot be on the right hand side. So in this arbitrary CFG that we designed for this case, S was on the right hand side. So the first step that you should take for designing a Chomsky normal form is S cannot be on the right hand side. And the very easy way to do this is, let us take this example. Let us introduce a new terminal, new start symbol S0, and do something like S0 goes to S. And then you have S goes to 0s1 epsilon. Now you may ask that this is a very simple redundant thing to do. Why we are doing so? This answer will be given to you most practically by taking an example and by showing you that if it was not the step, what problem you will face. Got my point? So this is a very trivial step, but this needs to be done. S cannot be, if S is the start symbol, S cannot be on the right hand side. So in this equivalent grammar, S0 is the start symbol and S0 is not on the right? So I have just introduced a new start symbol and obeyed this step. I obeyed this step, right? So what is the next step? The next step is you remove all epsilon rules, right? So step 2 is you remove all rules like A goes to epsilon. These are called vanishing productions. You remove all these things, and that can be also easily done. Now step 3 is very simple. See, you need not memorize anything. Just listen to me. Just look to the board. So you need to get rid of vanishing productions. A goes to epsilon. No, there cannot be any non-terminal that can be reduced this way, that can vanish this way. Okay, you need to get rid of unit productions. These are unit productions. A goes to B. No, you cannot have rules like A goes to B. You can only have rules like A goes to AB, right? You can only have rules like A goes to BC. So you have to take care of that. A goes to B. This type of unit rules, unit productions should be taken care of. This type
Sir,
of epsilon rules should be taken care
sir,
of. Yes.
sir, can A goes to a terminal in third rule?
Yes. Third rule.
Can
I
A
am
goes to
talking
terminal?
about a non-terminal. Where from a terminal came in your mind?
Okay, sir, sorry. Okay.
Huh? Okay. Step. Please pay attention. Okay. So step 3 is done. Step 4. What can be the step 4? Step 4 is, see, your Chomsky normal form allows only productions of this form. The left hand side is one non-terminal and the right hand side is two non-terminals side by side. So what are the other cases? One case is epsilon should be removed. One case is unit production should be removed. Another case is you can have more than one non-terminal side by side. A goes to B, C, D, E. Remember, I am writing in capital letters. That means non-terminals, right? Or A can be of the form B, C, D, E. Remember, I write in small letters. That means terminals. So you have to get rid of these productions also, and try to derive something like A goes to BC only. because that is allowed, right? Got my point? And 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 implementing all these 4 rules, what all these 4 rules say? It says that okay, in step number 5, eventually you reach, if you take care of all such derivations and slowly reduce them, you essentially reach to the point that you have productions only of the form A goes to BC or A goes to a single terminal. Got my point? So what lesson did you learn? What is the moral of the story? The moral of the story is the freedom that beta was given doesn't matter, right? So we started context-free languages and grammars with the most generic definition of how alpha beta looks like. And we defined restrictions based on how alpha beta looks like. We told that mod alpha is essentially equal to 1, and if left hand side is 1, obviously this is a non-terminal, and beta was free to look like. Beta can look like anything, and alpha beta were members of V union T star. So the moral of the story is, even if beta looks like anything, as long as the left hand side is equal to 1, and as long as productions of this form qualifies a grammar to become a CFG, all looks of beta can be normalized. All looks of beta can be normalized to 2 non-terminals side by side or a terminal alone, such that all rules of grammar in Chomsky normal form look like this. That is the moral of the story. That is the moral of the inherent story that relates my all classes in the past. Do we agree? Yes or no?
Yes, sir.
Done? No confusion, I think.
Sir.
Any questions you have? The easiest way to ask questions is to ask your mind. This is point number 1. Now, ask your mind is a very, very, very philosophical thing, right? Let me quantify. So asking your mind means looking into the form, looking into the strings, and try to have an interpretation of the most general way of interpreting the string, right? Now, once you go to the most general way, it is easier for you to think of strings that are actually generated from that most general definition. So that is why from the very first class, be it was of finite automata, be it was of regular expressions, be it was of grammars, I always stress on the most general form of understanding, because it gives you a better way of quantifying examples, right? Yes, agreed or not? Yes.
Yes, sir.
Agreed? Yeah. Okay.
Yes, sir.
So it ends today's class. Let us meet on Thursday, and we'll directly have some examples to change any arbitrary CFG to its Chomsky normal form. Yes? Please go through the book, or you may go through internet, you may go through online materials, whatever you need to do. But please go through, because unless you go through, things will not solidify in your brain, right? Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you,
Thank you,
sir.
sir.
Yeah.
Sir, can you tell about the timing
Yes.
for the exam?
Exam. I said that I will decide with madam. I will sit with madam, and we'll decide on a time. Don't worry about time. But remember, the basic intention of a class assessment or a midterm examination is to check whether you are up to date. So the syllabus will be up to
Till
Thursday.
Thursday, sir.
Whatever I teach up to Thursday or discuss up to Thursday will be the syllabus.
Okay, sir.
And the time of the exam and the modality of the exam will be conveyed to you either by me or by madam. Don't worry. We are responsible people. Don't worry so much, Abhishek. Okay? Yeah. Okay.
It's not me actually, sir.
Huh? Yes?
Sir, actually my
Yes?
chats get flooded. That's the reason I'm asking, sir.
What happened?
Nothing, sir. Nothing, sir.
Okay. Okay. Bye.
Thank you, sir.